So here we are in our Alice world, and let's go ahead and start with a pretty simple example. I'm going to create a new sand world for this example, and I'm going to add a couple objects. So let's go to Egypt, and I'm going to add a pyramid in the background just to give the scene a little bit of character, but we're not going to use it here. And I want to add, let's go to the people gallery. So scroll over here to people. And I'm going to add two characters, and I think I'm going to add Josh over here on the right. And let's go ahead and add Natalie here on the left. So these are going to be the characters that take care of introducing us to the if-else block. And you can see the if-else block down here in this little greenish colored block next to do together. The way if-else blocks work is it allows us to execute one bit of code if one statement is true, and another bit of code if that statement is untrue. These are what are known as Boolean checks. Boolean checks are checks that return either a value of true or false. So let's start throwing some code in here and take a look at what we mean by Boolean variable. Okay, so to start the scene, let's make Natalie a little bit bigger than Josh. So click on Add Objects, go to Resize, and let's make her a little bit bigger. And we're going to be using this for our first example of an if-else block. Down in your method window now, find if-else next to do together and drag it into the programming window. It will ask you for an argument, and right now we're going to select true. If-else blocks of code will always evaluate to be either true or false. Either something's true or it's not. If the statement is found to be true, that first section that says do nothing will execute. And if the statement is found to be false, that second section will be the code that executes. Now we don't want true, so click on function and then find Natalie is taller than and drag it over true. We want to see if she's taller than Josh, so select Josh as the argument. Now, if Natalie is taller than Josh, that first line will run. Otherwise, the second line will run. If Natalie is taller than Josh, we're going to instruct Natalie to turn around in a circle to the left. When we run the program, you can see Natalie turning to the left. Now, if I were to go and resize Josh so that Josh is now bigger than Natalie, this if statement might not always execute to be true. The only time this if statement will execute to be true is if Natalie is taller than Josh. So if I resize Josh so that he is now taller than Natalie and run this program, hit restart, you'll see Natalie doesn't turn at all. That's because the if statement is evaluating to false. When the if statement evaluates to false, the block of code underneath else will be the code that executes. Right now it's telling Josh to do nothing. It's telling the whole program to do nothing, so nothing is happening. If I take Josh and tell him to turn left by one full revolution and run the program now, Natalie is not taller than Josh, so that's a false statement. And if Natalie is not found to be taller than Josh, then that else block of code will execute and Josh should turn around. And we can see Josh turns around. If I go back and resize him so that he's now shorter than Natalie again, and run this program, Natalie is turning around once again. But this is all happening without me having to change any code whatsoever. It's all based on whether Natalie is taller than Josh. So I've essentially programmed this code so that it has two possible executions, and the height of Natalie is what's driving this animation. If it makes it a little bit simpler, think of an if-else expression, kind of like what you see on the screen in this flowchart. What's going to happen is the program is executing like you're probably used to, and it's going to get to the if check. And it's going to see if the expression is true or false. So it's going to test your expression. In our case, it was, is Natalie taller than Josh? If it's true, the if statement will be executed. That body immediately under the if statement will be executed, and the program is done, or it will move on to the next block of code, and it will completely ignore whatever is in the else block. Similarly, if we get to that test expression and it's false, we test, is Natalie taller than Josh, and the value is false, or it returns that that's not a true statement. We will instead go over, execute this else statement, whatever code is in the else, and then exit, ignoring the if statement over here. So in either case, one of two things is going to happen. So again, that's called a Boolean value. The expression we're testing is either going to be true or false, and the block of code that's executed is completely determined by whether or not the statement is true or false. So let's think of a more useful or prudent example for what we want to do here. I'm going to create a new world, and I'm going to add a tortoise and a counter and maybe some food on the counter to give you a better example of how we can use these if statements. Now I'm going to do this in a time lapse because it's something that you've seen done before. So the objects that I'm using are just from the environments gallery and the kitchen gallery, and I'm going to add a tortoise from the animals gallery. So let's go ahead and speed that up. We'll create that scene, and if you want to follow along, just take the time to create a similar scene on your own. And here we go. We have our final scene here. The only thing that I forgot to do is add some food from the kitchen. So if you're in the kitchen gallery, go to food. And let's go ahead and add a couple of items to this counter where the tortoise ends up. So I'm going to move this apple over here and have an apple on the counter. Let's make sure that that's centered correctly. Awesome. So we've got our apple, and maybe let's add one more piece of food, maybe something not quite so healthy. And gosh, probably the best thing that I can see on this list right here would maybe be the cookie. So let's go ahead and add a cookie to the scene. And let's get my reminder off there. Get the cookie into the scene. And because I can't see it, it's actually under the floorboard. I'm going to right-click on the cookie and have the cookie move to the apple, and there I've got that kind of moved on the screen there, and we'll get a hold of that cookie, so zoom in. And that's a pretty small cookie, so let's go ahead and make the cookie a little bit bigger. No, it's not quite to scale. So now we have a cookie and an apple on the counter. Awesome. Just one last quick test. Let's go ahead and make sure that the tortoise walks up and looks at the cookie all right. So you can see our animation is running. Perfect. So this is the scene that we're going to use as the basis for looking at our if-else block. I'm going to have the program look at a variable and determine whether or not the tortoise wants to eat healthy with the apple, or maybe have some sweets with the cookie. Select your tortoise, go to the properties, and let's create a new variable for the tortoise. And this is going to be called healthy eater. We want to know, is the tortoise going to be a healthy eater? I'm going to use a Boolean check here, and I'm going to set it to a value of true. This means that by default, my turtle is going to be a healthy eater, and if he's a healthy eater, I want him to eat the apple. So I now have access to a Boolean variable here, health eater set equal to true. Now, drag your if-else block to the end of this code. Right now, this if statement isn't going to do much of anything, but it will be encountered about the same time that the tortoise finishes his animation and faces the two items. I now want to use this Boolean variable that I just created by dragging it over to true. Essentially what this says right here is, if the tortoise healthy eater variable is set to true, we're going to do nothing in this block. Otherwise, we're going to do nothing in this block, but we're going to continue to refine this a little bit. To just see if this is working, I'm going to use the same method. If the tortoise is a healthy eater, I'm going to have him say, I want to eat a healthy snack. Otherwise, I'm going to have the tortoise say, I would like to eat something sweet. So now I have a branch in my program where one of two things can happen. If the tortoise is a healthy eater, he's going to say he wants to eat a healthy snack. Otherwise, the tortoise is going to say he wants to eat something sweet. I'm going to add a 3-second duration argument to both of these commands so they stay on the screen a little bit more. So 3 seconds for both. And let's see what happens. The tortoise walks over to the counter, just like in the animation we kind of previously set up. And now he says, I want to eat a healthy snack. He's saying that he wants to eat a healthy snack because the healthy eater variable is set to true. If I were to take this and set it equal to a value of false, the animation still runs the exact same at the beginning, but when it hits the branch, that is that if statement, he now says, I would like to eat something sweet. This part of the program could go either way depending on this variable. Right now, the only way to change the variable is for us to manually select true or false, but later, as we write more sophisticated programs, users will be able to change that by pressing keys on the keyboard. In both cases, I may want the tortoise to look at the camera before making his statement, so I can do this by just selecting method, and we're going to have the tortoise head turn to face the camera before he says anything, so turn to face camera. And we'll do this over a duration of 2 seconds. And this is the same thing he's going to do regardless of what he says. So let's add a turn to face here as well. Turn to face camera over a duration of 2 seconds. Now when we run this animation, in both cases the tortoise will turn and face the camera before saying something to us. So let's go ahead and get the tortoise. We're going to make him an unhealthy eater. So we're going to set healthy eater to false, hit play, and watch the animation. With that new bit of code, the tortoise is going to turn to face the camera and say, I would like something sweet. Now you can get pretty involved in this. You can start animating his lips, you can add sounds to this. There's really a lot of things you can do. But this if statement right here represents a branch in the program where the animation can go one of two ways. The tortoise could be a healthy eater, he might not be a healthy eater. You now spend your time programming the different animations based on what happens. If the tortoise is a healthy eater, you might have him take another step towards the counter, pick up the apple, and eat it. And if he's not a healthy eater, you might have him step up to the counter, grab the cookie, and then sneak off the screen. The idea for the animation is completely up to you, but the important thing to keep in mind while we do this is we're controlling what happens in the animation, not by recoding everything that happens every time. We have two scenarios already programmed, the tortoise eating the cookie and the tortoise eating the apple, and we're controlling it based on this check right here. You can start to embed if checks in one another and start to get dozens of different possible animations that can run. Now, you certainly have to program them all, but there's no limit to how many if statements you can use to control the action of your program and have a number of different scenarios pre-programmed before you run an animation. That's going to do it for the if-else check portion of this lesson.